So if you haven't had a chance to sign in yet, please sign in at the back door there. We're going to give it another minute. I see a couple people outside working their way in, and then we'll begin. In accord with the Select Board's wishes, this is now being recorded. So we have the microphones to kind of pick up comments. If you have a comment to make, please raise your hand. We can bring you a microphone so the video captures it. It's not live, but it will be posted later. So that is happening today. Thank you. All right, good morning again, everyone. My name's Michael Parr. I'm the hazmat assistant with the LEPC here, working out of the fire department. I'm sure you've met me before or done permits with me through the fire department. This is our meeting for March 31st of 2025, 1st of 2025. Over the last 2 years, we kind of shifted them from being January and or December and July, which are really busy times for holidays and vacations, to being March and September. So we're glad to see there's a great deal of attendance here. If you haven't had a chance yet, please sign in before you leave so we can track all of that. Today's agenda is probably pretty familiar. We go over a lot of the same things each time, but we'll do some introductions, discuss the old business, which is a review of the minutes, if anyone had any comments or changes they'd like to see in the minutes from the last meeting. We talk about the Tier 2 reporting, which was just due March 1st. Incident response review for hazardous materials. 21E site assessments. The hazard mitigation plan update, we'll briefly touch on that. A quick discussion on some of the changes for the permits, and how we're processing them now, and then any other new business. And one of the new business things that we're going to talk about is regionalization of the LEPCs locally. So just real quick, we'll run around the room and let everybody introduce themselves so we can have a sense of who's represented if you haven't been here before. Start with the deputy. Maybe you can bring the mic around.
Neil Spacey, Deputy Fire Chief.
Okay. Dudley Darling, Juniper Hill Golf Course, North Row.
John Rappa, Tellefson and Company, also Chair of the Town Financial Planning Committee.
Angela Gassick, Epic Polymer Solutions.
Jason Rowell, Wegmans Food Market.
John Everett, Wegmans Food Market also. Scott Osborne, I'm our security manager for Wegmans Food Markets.
Scott Charpentier, Public Works Director.
Bob Federico, Building Inspector, Zoning Enforcement Officer.
Good morning, Ryan Hurt, Department of Homeland Security, Security Advisor.
John Brodka, Steris.
Mike Corelli with Steris.
Lieutenant Ajay Mavridis, Lieutenant, Northborough PD.
Thank you. So Chief Parenti regrets he was not able to be here today. He's teaching a course. We also at the fire department have 8 new firefighters starting. Well, 9 including, 9 total, 8 new funded through a grant through the FEMA SAFER program. So it's been very busy at the fire department the last week, and this is the second week of 3 weeks of in-house training for them before they go on to the groups there. So he's involved with a lot of that today.
Just a couple other updates from the fire department since we're here. Lorraine, who's the admin assistant, who's been there for 10 years. Today is her last day. We've generously acquired the admin assistant from DPW, Sarah Jean, so that'll be our new admin assistant. Like Mike said, we have 8 new firefighters that started under the SAFER, plus 1 that's an open position, so we have 9. They're going through a mini academy, and we ordered an ambulance in 2022, and we received it this week. So hopefully that'll be in service soon, and it's very much different than what you're used to seeing around town. So thank you, whoever lives in town or pays taxes in town. Thank you very much.
So the first order for the old business is just a quick acceptance of the previous minutes. So I sent those out in an email to everyone. You can see who the attendees were, who the public partners were. So if anyone has any comments or changes they'd like to see in those minutes, now would be the time we can bring it up. If anyone would like to move to approve, second, sorry, Scott and Bob. All in favor of approving the minutes from September? All right. Anybody opposed? All right, so we'll keep those minutes as is and move on. And if at any point you have a question about what we're talking about, please raise your hand and we'll come right to you. So Tier 2 reporting, it's due March 1st every year. We are at the point where we prefer the electronic copies, and in particularly PDFs. So we got that from pretty much everyone. There was 2 facilities I had to go back and request a PDF from because they sent in the old T2S form, which I don't have the software on my computer right now to open up. So we got all of that. There wasn't anything new submitted this year in terms of new facilities, and we had one of the facilities drop off. They closed last year, so they no longer had to report anything. So this is a list that's been pretty annual and consistent since I've been here, which is 4 or 5 years now. So any questions on Tier 2 reporting? Again, these would be extremely hazardous substances, or if you have safety data sheets on a substance and over 10,000 pounds of that substance, it would have to be reported to the local authority annually.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a question? Does anybody here, or maybe Mike, you can answer, have like a very simple like Excel sheet of what your products are that's easily accessible to any of our departments when they get there, or even if you have flammable cabinets, it tells you what the content is or anything like that? I'm taking that to no. All right.
We get inventories from most of these facilities when they do the permits,
Yeah,
so I put that up most of the time
yeah.
for us to access.
Okay. All right, we'll talk about something.
Okay. Yes.
Well, I'll have to see what we have in the system, but sometimes, you know, our responders go and they don't always have access to the computer or to go through an SDS sheet. If you've ever read it, you know, unless you know how to read an SDS sheet, and they've got better, it's not always the easiest to go through. So especially if it's some hazardous stuff, you know, or a flammable cabinet, you go in, it's like, what's in it? You know, so sometimes you'll see towns implement like, you know, a simple Excel sheet just tells you like, this is what's in it, this is the quantity, and then at least you kind of know. But that's something that,
Yeah, we haven't
I can
required
follow
them, we haven't required any of the facilities to list it like that.
yeah,
So they have to have the SDS sheets.
yeah.
And as you have submitted the inventories, I will put it in the permit or put it on the property. So it would be available through ESO, but we could look at other places to put it if we need to.
Yeah, we'll look at some things because it's. Yeah, it's an easy lift, you know, unless you have like a ton of things, Jairus. But we can come up with an idea, but just it'd be very simple stuff because it's rapid, you know, rapid information. You know, it's just like the 704 diamonds or, you know, radioactive stuff. It's that quick. Okay, that's what that is. But we can talk about something like that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll maybe come up with a format and see if people would be interested in participating. Okay. So incidents since our last meeting in September, we had 39 incidents that would have fallen into these categories for hazardous materials. The largest one here being a natural gas leak, and that kind of takes the cake every winter. So next time we have a meeting, it'll be March through September incidents. We probably won't have as many natural gas leaks because people aren't using their heat as much. Once the heat turns on in all these buildings, leaks get found, people think they smell it out in the street, so we get a lot more calls for that. The carbon monoxide incidents are, also 30% there, so some of them are just bad detectors going off, but some of them are legit, and we want to encourage people never to ignore carbon monoxide alarm, and if you don't know if your alarm is a smoke or a carbon monoxide alarm, consider it the safe thing to do to call us and have it checked. There was a deadly incident this Christmas up in New Hampshire where several people of a family passed up in a lake house because they didn't have a CO alarm. When they went up there, they turned on their heat and they all passed in their sleep. So we want to prevent that hazard from ever happening here. As for the dispersion of these, there isn't a particular time of day that they all happen at. It's pretty widespread, as you see. So it's important that we have the coverage that we have here in town so we can have a quick response to any of these. And we pulled out a couple particular incidents to highlight. So we have a residential incident here, and I'll let the deputy kind of walk you through what happened in this one.
All right, so I wasn't on this call, but Captain McManus does a very good report, so I can tell you all about it. So as you can see, it's an home heating oil spill. They got a call for the homeowner saying that they smelled gas in the house. Okay, so as we see, it's this time of year we get a lot of gas smells. One thing that we got to do when we go is, well, is there gas in that house? If they smell gas, there's no gas in that house. It could be a couple different things, right? It could be a leak that's out in our street, could be propane or whatnot. So, but, here's our thing where people tell you one thing, it smells like gas. We got there, obviously it smelled like oil when we got wet in the house. Do you have oil? Yeah. All right, so they go in the house, they make sure they meter, just to make sure, because we have the gas meters, it's a standard process. Went through, nothing on the meters, so there was no explosive gas. They went down to the basement, they found this, they took some pictures, reached out to the oil company. They had just delivered oil earlier that day. And then so through the photos and whatnot with the oil company, they said, yeah, they probably overfilled it, which did this overspill. Has anybody ever spilled home heating oil? It stinks. And it does not go away fast. So that's the unfortunate part of this. Minor spill, it was below the reportable quantity to clean it up, but like your odor, so especially if you have a finished basement or something. But side note on oil stuff is, unless you have it in your insurance policy, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, a lot of times insurance companies really kick back on some of this stuff when you spill oil when you're on. And if it gets into a porous environment like that, if you have a large oil spill and it seeps through the floor and into the groundwater, like you have to mitigate that, and that's a very costly thing, even so homeowner. I mean, is that an add-on usually?
Typically anything in the basement or anything to do with the basement, you've got to be really careful, especially with a homeowner insurance policy. You have to look for that endorsement. Some companies will write coverage for the basement as an endorsement, but beware of your limitations. You've got to really read the fine print. Some won't deal with oil. We had a case in Millbury when I was working there where back in the day when the lines were allowed to be buried under the slab, they developed a pinhole leak, and over the period of about 20 years, the oil had seeped into the ground below the basement slab. Long story short, they had to raise the house, take out basically the entire foundation and the slab. Cost somewhere around $300,000, was not covered by homeowners insurance. So check with your carrier, be explicit, and look for the fine print, because some may carry it, some may not. So it's basically buyer beware.
Thank you. Kind of beneficial that these are taped now. I don't know who to watch it, but that's helpful. And then obviously the oil company came out, they cleaned up a little bit. One thing they do have there, it looks like there's a pan underneath the filter, so that's a nice step for them, is that they were at least trying to think ahead of it, but when it comes off the top, it didn't happen. These are, your standard oil tanks. There's new generation oil tanks. You can still buy these, but they also have double-walled. They're Roth is a company, they're a German company, but everything comes from the top. It feeds off the top. It's double-walled. It's insulated within itself. Great product. Well, obviously more expensive, but they seem to hold up pretty well, and there's less leaks with those.
I think they're also approved for outside storage.
Yes, they are. Yep. All right, next one, Mark. So this one, somebody called and said, I think I see a stick of dynamite on this trailer. Okay. So this is down at one of the U-Haul places, obviously. Our crew got down there, and this is what they found. So they reached out to the police lieutenant or the detective. They said, call the state police, find out, get some guidance. State police, obviously, caution area, evacuate the area, isolation zone. They were going to send their explosive disposal unit out to look at it. As they're there, they're getting information of somebody had the trailer and a truck. They found this in the truck and then took it out of the truck and put it on the trailer. Obviously, probably not the smartest thing to do is to pick up stuff. I will say, things like dynamite or anything like that, especially like it's nitroglycerin, if it's old or crusty, it's very, very unstable. Even a shock can make that blow, and it's not a good day for you. So anyways, they left that there. The EOD came out, inspected it, found it to be an actual device, homemade. But in looking at who had rented it, it was, like a theatrics company had done it, so it was like a firework type stuff. Obviously fireworks are explosives, right? But it wasn't a contained, nitroglycerin high explosive. Still dangerous, will hurt, but won't necessarily, it will maim you, but not fully kill you. So they disposed of it. They didn't blow it up. It was basically just a theatrics thing where smoke grenade, basically. But it goes to show you that if you see stuff, well, obviously you see something, say something. Don't touch things, keep away, even walking close. There's videos of, and it's nefarious stuff, but I know there was one in Canada where, there was a package and, the police officer at the time was supposed to go on vacation. He was getting held over and things were getting, and taking forever. So started to walk towards it and got, probably about this far away, and it let go because it was on a sensor explosive trigger. So it was made for if you touch the bag or a jerk hit it, that set the detonation off. So just to be, cautious of that stuff. Obviously, timing-wise, this time of year, especially this month, marathon. So that's always a high publicity event. But also the 250th celebrations with Lincoln, Concord, Lexington, and Arlington. Major event. Concord alone is looking at estimating 400,000 people showing up on the Saturday. So big event, so that becomes a target. However, they know there's a lot of security there, so now maybe your tertiary becomes a target. And it may not even be an actual device. It could be something, they took a road flare, wrapped it up, put a thing in it, and put it down just to cause chaos. So these things happen. People do things that probably shouldn't be doing, but we have to be aware of that. And anybody that owns a business, same thing, you might find something and be like, oh, it's probably just that. Just err on the side of caution. Give us a call. We'll get the PD up there. And if it's something that we pick it up and it's like it's nothing, no harm, no foul. But at least if it was something, you're all set with that. What do you got for the next slide there?
Permits is next. All right, so our permits in September, we had 182 permits issued since September, and the majority of these were all renewals. So it's existing chemicals, substances at facilities that are annually renewed. You can see we have the fireworks display from Applefest was a portion of that. We have a few residential gunpowders in town, but the large variety of these are gasoline, diesel storage for generators, and then smaller quantities of flammable liquids, and then the hazard permits that are required for facilities we have in town annually. Any questions on those? So the LEPC, again, responsible when we have 21E site assessments. So if somebody's looking at purchasing a property, they might be refinancing a property. We get these requests to see if there's a history of hazardous material spills on the property. So since September, we've only had one of these. It was at 200 Southwest Cutoff, which is the Kimball Sand property. And they basically look at the past history of hazardous waste storage and transfer. So if you're taking ownership of the property, you are then liable and responsible for cleaning anything up. So they want to make sure, looking through our records, that they don't have any obvious signs of underground tanks or histories of transfer of hazardous waste, so that they don't have to worry about ever having to clean that up. And then the next slide, I put this in because when we do our site assessments, we get a lot of questions because we write a very formal report when we do this. Some departments will just do a quick electronics records look and give you a yes or no. But when we do our 21E site assessments, we do the individual site, all the paper records that we have on file, and we look at the abutters. So this particular one involved all of these surrounding abutters and whatever they had for a history of releases. So that's why these can be a little more extensive and there is a fee associated with them. But we're happy and willing to do it as they come through. Yes, sir. What was the question again?
Thank you. Does this feed the state's brownfields database?
No, it does not feed
Okay.
any other database. This is just us collecting information that we have in-house. I do refer to some state sites to kind of confirm, and then I put it in a report for the person requesting it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions on that one? Are you going into the LEPC one? Yeah, is that the next?
Yes.
All right, before we do that, I'm just curious as I was sitting here and listening. I'm just going to ask you guys, and I can bring the mic around or you can speak up loud, but what's the highest hazard product that you have on your property? Do you guys know offhand? You know, if you had to say, like, this is the thing that worries us the most. Is there, I mean, for you guys, it's probably... Agricultural chemicals. Welding and settling, yep. Explosives. What do you got? What do you think your highest hazards are? Yep, okay. Just a little, not a big deal. You guys, I know you guys got some stuff.
Yeah, welding, acetylene.
Welding, settling, gas, what do you guys got up there? I think I know what you guys have, but.
Yeah, I mean, glycol, but that's food safe.
Yep.
The oil that's running the compressors and
Yep.
stuff.
Is it glycol for the refrigerate now? You don't use any of the other hazard stuff? Cool. It's probably the trucks in the back parking lot. No, you're just here for this. I know it's whoever you bring in.
Probably got diesel, lead acid batteries.
Yep. No joke, that is true. Oil, lead acid. What do you guys got?
Ethylene oxide gas.
Yeah, that's nothing. Easy. And then, what do you guys got at town hall? Yeah. So. Yeah. So, no comment. Just trying to get an idea, because, you know, usually the big ones, unless you're really in like pharmaceutical areas, you know, there's not. Now, for us or for me as a responder, my biggest concern facilities is Amazon, FedEx, Amazon and UPS trucks driving around, because you don't know what they get. And there's so many things you can ship. But it's good to know because that's kind of the thing. If you have something big, that's one of the questions we're going to want to know quick is, what is your biggest concern right now? And it's going to be, you know, I got it down in the basement where the fire's going. That's our ammo storage. Good to know. So.
So next, we just wanted to do, before I get into this, the hazard mitigation plan that we discussed previously has been going back and forth between MEMA and FEMA for approval. So that we had a team that got together of, you know, department heads that looked at the hazard mitigation plan. Every 5 years, it's supposed to be renewed. That plan went through a process of, did we accomplish this goal? Did we not accomplish this goal? What's our new goals based on what we've had for natural hazards in the past, you know, ice storms, flooding, such. So that all got updated and sent back in September. In December, I believe, MEMA sent back revisions, which our partner, the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, worked on those and sent them up, and currently it's going back and forth between them and FEMA. So that plan is still in process. We're hoping in the next couple of months it finally gets the stamp of approval from FEMA, and then it'll go before the select board for a formal adoption. And what that does is it just opens up funding opportunities for us. So if we have this in place, we have goals to work on to help mitigate these things that we've identified. And if any of them have grant opportunities related to them, we can apply for those funding and move forward. So that's the update on the hazard mitigation plan. The LEPC review, we kind of wanted to just quickly discuss what this body is, why it exists, and a push that we're kind of getting from the state on regionalization. So if you're not overly familiar with LEPCs, they are the outgrowth of the EPCRA law. So the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act is a U.S. federal law enacted in 1986 to help communities plan for chemical emergencies, and it requires federal, state, and local governments, as well as industries, to share information about hazardous substances to improve emergency response and public awareness.
So I will say the last line, that's how we always want to focus on this, right? Yeah, you gotta file stuff, you gotta, you know, to compliance to put in the documentation, what you carry. All of this documentation leads to emergency response and public awareness. So whenever you're thinking about these documents, think of where does this trickle down to? The whole concept was to make it safe for responders to respond and public awareness, because it was, you know, obviously this is back in the 80s when there was a lot of PFAS leaks, bless you, and whatnot. But when you're thinking like, oh, I got to do this document, or the SDSs, the main goal about them is, you know, obviously your own occupant safety, but our safety when we respond. So whenever you look at them, when you're bored, and, you know, I know they're detailed and I've seen them, but this is an actual reason for them.
So instead of spending a long time trying to explain this whole thing, there's a great video on the EPCRA site that gives you a very detailed overview of why they created this law and all the different tiers and levels of it. It's about a half hour, but the gist of it is there were several major hazardous incidents in the world around this time, and they had really bad consequences for the public. The initial one was not even in America, and so because of those bad things that happened that injured a lot of people and innocent people, not even at these facilities that had all this information, they developed this law so that local communities would be more aware of what's surrounding them and build their ability to respond. So this is, if you want to screen capture that, or I'll send it out in the minutes, you'll be able to see that. And if you're interested in all the details of the program, it's right there. The key provisions that it'll talk about are emergency planning. So it requires the state and the local emergency planning efforts for chemical hazards. We establish state emergency response commissions, which is the SERCs, and then the local planning committees, which is us. The LEPCs develop emergency response plans for chemical spills or releases, so that's our hazmat plan. And then we're involved in like the natural hazard mitigation and lots of other plans as well. Emergency release notification, so facilities must immediately report accidental releases of hazardous substances that exceed reportable quantities to local, state, and national authorities. We have the hazardous chemical storage reporting, which is facilities must submit safety data sheets and annual chemical inventory reports, so that's your tier 1 and tier 2, to inform local responders and public about hazardous materials. So the tier 2s, that's the state has a HazConnect site, which you send that stuff into, and then you just send us a PDF of that report, and you're covered. Toxic release inventory requires industries to report annual releases of specific toxic chemicals into the environment. So again, trying to promote transparency and pollution reduction. So those are the key things covered by EPCRA. There's lots of different stakeholders. I mean, you could basically say everyone's a stakeholder in EPCRA because it impacts the facilities, it impacts the responders, and then the public is automatically going to be impacted. But these are the ones they highlight, and you can find anybody in that list. There's great fact sheets and training if you want to actually get built up on this even more for your local facilities. They have a great training online that goes through all the details of it and things that you can include into your emergency response plan. So that's all available on the EPCRA site as well. But this is all just bringing us to look at what we normally do. So at the local level, where, like we said, we have those maintaining and developing the response plans. Our membership is going to be the local officials, so the department heads, and then the members of the industries. So if you submit a tier 2, you kind of default a member of the LEPC. We always will invite anybody who does permitting. So if they do permitting with us, but they don't necessarily have to submit a tier 2 because they're under the quantities, they get invited as members of the LEPC. We have public access, so anybody can reach out to me through the website, email, and they come and view all of this information that we receive and put together. So that's open to anyone. And ideally, we try to do training and drills. We also can apply for grants and funding to support these preparedness activities. So the most basic functions in the year for an LEPC is collecting the tier 2s in March, and then having 2 meetings and some sort of training every year. So every LEPC, every town that isn't regionalized is doing these things to cover themselves and keep themselves available for grants and whatnot. So when it comes to the regional emergency planning committees, it's basically taking the LEPC from all these individual communities and making it into a more umbrella approach. And it can enhance the resource sharing and streamline emergency response, because the reality is that none of our individual towns really have the ability to handle this type of response individually. We'd be pulling in mutual aid, we'd be pulling in state and district resources immediately to handle any of this. And they're going to function similar to an LEPC, but we're going to cover more counties, more regions with shared risks. So you would have to still have 2 meetings, but those 2 meetings would now be covering 4 or 6 towns versus just every town having the same thing. You could have a training, which if we were to run a full-scale training or a tabletop exercise like we did a couple of years ago, we did it with Westboro, we did it with our surrounding communities, but it was, we all counted it individually for our LEPC, but it could be for the regional purpose.
Real quick, Mike. So
Yep.
before we get into the benefits and all that, we're going to get into that because obviously you're part of this whole process in agreeing to go to it, as well as the select board and whatnot. But quick Massachusetts Commonwealth Law civics class, all right? There's no quiz at the end, but just so you understand it. Massachusetts, very unique. We run a Commonwealth form of government. Basically, that means counties are just there as borders. They don't really do anything. They don't have much authority. So every town in Massachusetts has an equal vote and equal say in what happens, right? So basically, for a lot of things to get done at the state level, and it has to be implemented at the local level, every single state has to, each actual town has to vote for it. So very difficult to get things done. So most places in the country, because we were the first, they said that's not really a good form of government. So a lot of places have county and county government, so it goes from state to county to locals. The counties have a lot of authority, and so basically it's a regional process, right? So there's fire departments, for example, that, you know, it's a regional-based fire department, which covers probably Massachusetts, would be like 4 or 5 towns, right? So rather than each town having X piece of equipment, they share resources. Economically, it's more feasible response. Your product to the community is better. But in Massachusetts, it's very difficult to do. Even if you get a town, 2 towns to agree to do a regional, and sidebar, schools have a different law in Massachusetts, so it's a little easier for them on a regional aspect. But so if you wanted 2 towns wanted to join and merge their police and fire department, they could do it, but there's no regional funding source, so each town would have to fund a regional benefit. And when you get into emergency response, when you don't know what your calls are going to be, for example, so, you know, we'll just say, you know, town A and B. Well, town A has 10 calls, town B has 3 calls one year, so town 3 is like, well, why are we paying the same amount of money as town 10? You know, and then it's reversed the next year. You know, you could do bill by call, so it gets complicated. Plus, you know, again, no regional thing. So each town, they have to be employed by the town benefits, you know, if one change, so it's very complicated. So unfortunately, Massachusetts, this is commonplace across most of the United States, that regional, because they don't do a lot of local stuff. So there are benefits to it, and so the way that Massachusetts is the only way that the state can kind of get people to go in this direction is to limit funding, right? It makes sense, but it gets complicated to do it. People usually avoid it. Now you get into it and they say, well, you know, grants for regional are going to be this, grants for local, you're not going to be either eligible or you're only going to get a little. And they're doing that with a lot of things in Massachusetts now, trying to get that regional aspect. But as we move into this, so this is not a new concept. It has a benefit. There are regional planning committees, and I believe Mike will talk about that already are regional in Massachusetts, even local. It makes sense, but it'd be different. I don't know, what else, what do you got on?
Yeah, that's, so the discussion, we met 2 weeks ago with Shrewsbury, Westboro, and Southboro, and Kevin Filchik, which is the MEMA representative, to discuss the possibility of Northborough and those towns of joining a REPC versus an LEPC. So LEPCs, they used to be certified, then MEMA realized they're not really authorized to certify anything, so now it's just, if you say you have an LEPC, you basically an LEPC. So they're kind of pushing to go regionalized because they want to share some more of these, share the benefits of it, including funding. So we're going to talk about those 3 different things right there. The closest one to us is called Blackstone Valley REPC, and it includes Millbury, Grafton, and 8 other communities. So I think they're a region of 10. So that was an example that Kevin had given us. And just looking at these benefits, the first one that we talk about would be management-wise. So instead of maintaining 4 LEPCs, regionalization would require 1 REPC. So that would cover all the communities. This would involve developing a single emergency response plan and maintaining that. Hazardous material plan, that would be 1 for everyone. Pooling the chemical information, so when you submit the Tier 2 information, it wouldn't necessarily change for how you submit it. You'd still probably just email it to either myself or whatever the designation would be, and then they would pool it for you. And then sharing meeting and review requirements, so they'd only have to have 2 meetings versus having each town having 2 meetings. And then you get to kind of network with all those different communities and see the good pros and cons and what they do and they don't do that maybe would be good for your facility.
How many companies in here have another another one of your companies in Southborough or Shrewsbury or Westborough. And you guys have, okay. I'm going to say it would benefit that too, but all right.
So the second thing that he highlighted was funding. So the state is giving preference to regional funding requests versus local funding requests. So we had a grant that we applied for to get hazmat renewal training this year as an LEPC for the fire department, and it was denied because the funding priority went to all the regional LEPCs, REPCs. So the idea is that if you are regional, you're going to impact a much greater population. You're going to impact a more realistic representation of what that response and that training would be. And so it's more likely that you get funding. And that funding pool would also grow because it's based on the population of each community. So whatever tier you're in would get added to the tiers of the other communities. So you'd be able to do a more realistic exercise with a larger funding pool. And I know in the past where we've looked at this, what we were getting, which was 46 to 5,000 eligibility amount, wasn't really enough to cover what we would have to do if we were going to do an exercise. So that's the funding piece. And then the last piece is discussion of all hazards. All of these groups look at things beyond hazmat. So the baseline is looking at hazardous materials and mitigating that. But as we talked about, we've done the natural hazard mitigation. We have shelter plans, community emergency response teams. There's all different aspects of community response that LEPCs have taken on. And so as you figure out what the regional needs are, you can, again, pool assets and work towards having that stuff available for all the communities instead of just one. I know a couple of things he mentioned were like drones and generators for emergencies and sharing that type of stuff. The next slide is probably an overview of the next step. So,
So
take that.
before we get into next steps, so just so you understand, so the way that things have transitioned through civil defense to emergency management, LEPC, REPC, you know, the Right to Know Act, that's where you get the chemical stuff, right? And you have the meetings, but to make things more beneficial and make the meetings a little bit more valuable, we're transitioning into an all hazards approach. So we'll still focus on, you know, the chemical stuff, but more of an all hazards, like, you know, so rather than knowing, okay, you know, you have gasoline and diesel, it's, okay, if that happens from an all hazard response plan, how is that going to impact things? You know, if the golf course closes, we're looking at mayhem, right? And you're going to lose a ton of money because everybody's going to go to Highfields, and then they're going to love Highfields because that's where I live, and they're not going to come back to Juniper. Not true. I like Juniper too. But you can see from all hazards, like a lot of things that kind of impact. And I say that jokingly, but even if you say, oh, you know, Juniper's closed, you know, everybody's going to be calling. They're going to be calling them. They're going to transfer down. They're eventually going to call 911 and the police because that's what they always do and say, why can't I get a hold of Juniper Golf Course? I need to go. And so you can see where it tertiates down, but then you do lose money, and that's important. So the goals of emergency response is to mitigate the hazard, correct the hazard, and then to get you back up and running as soon as possible. That's emergency management, a real quick cycle. Preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, and then try to figure it out in the past. So we want to get more to that, and the other towns want to that, where does this stuff meet the road, right? So just like the documents meet the road. So if we have 4 different plans in 4 different towns, and none of them we will kind of coordinate with each other and don't know, you know, and those are all our mutual aid, and they're coming in, even mutual aid, not even emergency, but DBW, building inspectors, everybody coming in, and they're going to be like, okay, what do we do? Like, how do we work? And you figure if you have an incident in your town, you're going to rely on those other people to come in and do everything. So if Northborough has a large incident, you know, the chief's probably not available for LEPC, I'm not available for emergency management, you know, all these things. Bob might be tied up, Scott might be tied up. Now, if we have a plan, now the DPW directors from those communities can come in and assist. The building inspector for those communities can come in and assist. You know, because, you know, now you're pulling, if we have a regional thing, then we pool those regional things together. But it's all that kind of sharing resources and making things actually work. And to make it work, you kind of got to plan and know what you're doing up front. And, you know, these are even things that private industry does. Other companies that have similar hazards will talk to each other and kind of be like, hey, what do you do? Or I came from a community that had a couple of private schools. So part of their plan was to coordinate with some of the other private schools so that if something happened at one school, they had a plan to move those students to that school and vice versa because they're working together. So there's a lot of benefits on that. That's the response. The management side, there's a lot that goes into it. So if you have so Blackstone, they have one person that's like their administrator. It's a position, and they manage everything and coordinate it all. So that's the benefit too, rather than 4 towns doing duplication of efforts, one person. A larger pool of people, more people getting together, more people in one room leads to more discussions, more education, more information, and a little bit more fun too. We might even have the availability to buy snacks, you know, so you might have coffee and donuts if you want that. What else on that, Mike? And then so you get that. Oh, and the grants. Obviously the grant stuff. So so Homeland Security Regional Council does this too, is that, you know, now we can share those resources. So rather than, you know, Shrewsbury, Northborough, Southborough, and Westborough all buying like, you know, a gigantic, you know, generator, right? Like something that you would very rarely use. Now you could buy 1 or 2 under a grant and share that resource. Obviously, I would advocate that we house them. But you can see where those come. So, or shelters, you know, shelters are notoriously, no one can manage their own shelter unless it's a couple of people, right? But then if you do like the big regional shelters, you know, not many people want to go. I mean, I was in a town that was similar to Northborough, and people are like, I don't want to go to a shelter where I have to be with, you know, Lowell Lawrence, you know, Duxbury or whatever, you know, because it's just the way it is, you know, so they don't feel comfortable. So if we have towns of similar towns that they're comfortable, oh, I know people from Shrewsbury, I'll go to like that kind of shelter thing. Plus, the big thing about shelters is you have to staff it. So, and that's a hard thing too. You have to staff it continuously, and you have to actually have, you know, certifications and whatnot. American Red Cross is a great asset, but, you know, if it is a regional event, you know, how many of those people are available and how much are they going to prioritize, you know, our community over another community. So there's a bunch of benefits with that. What else you got on that? Any questions on those things or anything? Does it sound like a good idea? Would you guys be on board if we went from an LEPC to an REPC? We still have local control of everything on ours. It just basically, it would be the REPC down to the LEPC. Yeah.
I've brought it up in the past, but we have a railroad that goes through town. And they did do work on the tracks. But if you look at the tracks, it's steel that's nailed to wood that's sitting in gravel. And some of these are raised up. So if something happens to the cars when they go through and they derail, they're going to roll over and then down an embankment. And some of these embankments in Northborough are pretty tall. So if you have cars that are carrying hazardous materials, you don't know what they are because they're not submitting any paperwork to the town, and you'll have to deal with that when that happens. With these regional PCs have more, I guess, a little more emphasis with them.
Quick, simple answer to your question about railroads is no. Just from a high level, railroads are an entity upon themselves. You want to talk about an entity that has their own rules and doesn't have to listen to anybody else, that's rails. It's very tough. So you have to work with them, and I agree. But they are, they recognize the importance of it. So just recently, this past year, because we recognized the gap, We reached out to CSX, it's the rail, this is the Boston-Fitchburg secondary line, and asked them, you know, what goes on this rail. So they gave us a list of what the common chemicals go on this rail, where all the markers are, so we now have a map that shows where all the markers are on the rail, and all the emergency response communication stuff. The other thing that some of us have is it's an app called Ask Rail. Basically, we can go to a car, type in the number that's on the side of the car, and it'll tell us what's in that car. So that's very helpful. And rail, within the last 10 years maybe, transferred from having their own hazard markings to following the same things that's on the road. So the diamond placards, they used to have all these code numbers that told you what the hazard was, or they had the UN number. Now they'll have like the diamonds. So we can identify stuff a lot. They do have great response, and it's going to be relationships with them. So luckily, this rail that runs through Southborough and us. So there's two communities that we can get. We're lucky enough not to have the rail that's on the other side of Westboro and Southborough, which has a significant amount of hazards that go back and forth on it. So yes, we can never force the rail, and you never want to force the rail to do anything, because they will push back because they know the courts will go in their favor. But if you work with them, they'll understand of like, okay, that makes sense, you know, and hopefully influence them to do it. So to know the hazards, yes. To know what their response plans are, yes. And for them to start coming into this type of group, I think they would be more apt to come to a regional one more so than just a local one, because it'd be one meeting rather than 4. And it's CSX basically runs all the rail cars in Massachusetts. They don't own the rails. Some other companies own some of the rails. I believe CSX does own this rail, but the other rail is a shared rail. You know, and even though that rail, so I'm talking about the one that's kind of on the other side of Westboro, but if they have an event that's large enough with some of the stuff that they go on that line, that could affect our community from a plume or whatnot. Or you just think the tertiary of, okay, now the Mass Pike's closed because that's where it's over. Where's all that traffic going? So you just think of the tertiary, and that's part of the all hazards plan of like, okay, well now we might have to get our traffic control points to get that traffic moving, because we still have to go to calls and get around, and now we're impacted. So there's a lot of things that kind of tertiary down. So I know I took that on a long journey with you, but I hope it kind of answered on the mindset of, yes, we'll bring them in, but how much we can influence them is questionable. I don't know if, Scott, you've had much, well. Yeah, it's
It is essential commerce, so they're going to put what they want, where they want, when they want it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I had some luck with, who was it, who owns the rails on the other side? Colias? No, the one that runs on the T at Amtrak. Yeah. So we kind of had some effort with them. Like, so just for example, they were putting, remember when the rails got all frozen up because of the heaters and all that stuff on the rails, and then everything was shut down. So then they did this big campaign, and they, like, through the whole rail, they were putting heaters at all the junction boxes. So there was one intersection, there was 4 junction boxes. They wanted to put in 4 1,000-pound propane tanks. And basically, they could come into the town and say, there you go. And they don't have to permit them, they don't have to do anything, they don't even have to really tell you that they put them there. But the relationship was there. And they kind of worked, we're like, well, could you put one over here and one over there? And, you know, and they're kind of like, okay, I understand that, because if one blows, you don't want them all next to each other. But then at the end of the day, they made a decision to put them all together because of delivery. It was a lot easier for them to do a delivery rather than 4 spots for delivery. But they did add some other things into it that we asked. So they did work with us, but then they kind of made their decision at the end of the day. But any other questions on who else you want us to go after and try to regulate? We'll try. I think the rail's probably the hardest one that we have. And if there's any state-owned product.
Any other comments on the RAPC idea? So Kevin had laid out these steps for us, so, you know, we have to kind of make a decision if we want to look into this. The chiefs who were at that meeting essentially said they wanted to see a draft letter from Kevin explaining the pros and cons, and then also see a draft of the bylaws made up. So right now, every LEPC either has a rules list or bylaws, so they wanted to see like a merge of those before they would make a decision. So that's in process to kind of see what that would look like and to see if the other communities are still leaning the way of going this way. But if there isn't any strong feeling or opposition, I think we're going to continue leaning that way as well. And if I suspect we'll probably have another meeting before anything gets big time decided on this. So hopefully we'll have another update for you in September on this. All right. So I was asked by Joanne to share this notice about CM DART. They do the Central Mass Disaster Animal Emergency Response Team. And so they have a training coming up, so she just wanted to advertise this with all of you. It's either or, so you don't have to be at both, but there's one April 30th, one May 8th at the Grafton Fire Department and then the Northbridge Fire Department. And it's just how to deal with animals and during a stressful incident, suggestions on reading their behavior and how to handle. So if you're interested in that, I can put it back up at the end. But then at this point, I'll open it up to any other business.
Just on the animal stuff, so there's regulations in Massachusetts, actually it's federal law, that you have to have plans for animal response, pet animal type response. It comes from Katrina, where people, I'm not leaving my house. If you're not taking my dog, and we're like, can't take your dog, you know, that people who are like, I would rather stay in my house, you know, and deal with the consequences of whatever the storm does. So it became more of a mandate that you have to have some kind of plan. It went from having a separate shelter for animals. Now there's a lot of co-located shelter stuff. So it's something that we have to deal with on a regular basis if there's actual evacuation. But anybody in here that has pets, they know that, you know, sometimes they probably will not leave their house if they can't take their pet with them, and we can't have that. So that's something that will go into the shelter plan as well, because CM DART is really good at it. There's not many people on that. But now if we can get one or two for regional shelter, benefit for us.
And does anyone have anything that they'd like to bring up for us to discuss? Bob?
Thank you. On July 1st, the Commonwealth is moving to the 10th edition of the building code. Right now, we're in a concurrency period where if you're doing work on a building, you can choose between the current edition, which is the 9th edition, or the 10th. July 1st, that concurrency period goes away. What this means is that with every update and code edition, there are some changes that have come down the pipe. One of them, and I haven't seen it yet, but both the building code and the fire code have certain restrictions on hazardous chemicals and storage, and based upon the type of building you're in and the type of chemicals and the quantity, you may be limited. Okay, I haven't seen any difference between the current edition of the building code and the new edition, and it's generally in agreement with the fire code. The other thing is that if you have an existing building and you're maintaining it and you're not altering or expanding it, you don't have to do anything, okay? Typically, the building code says if you currently have occupancy in a building, if you alter it, make changes, change egress paths, change windows, roofs, whatever work you do new to it does have to apply to the new building code. One of the changes that is coming up is that periodic inspections. Now, we have Wegmans and we have the golf course here, and we do liquor license inspection license renewals. Typically, the sprinkler and alarm reports, we just need to see it. As of the 10th edition, when it comes out, Those are going to have to be submitted electronically to the building department before we make the appointment to come out, okay? Those are the two most common situations. If by chance we're on a 5-year periodic to come out and see some other types of businesses, the same rules apply. We need to see updated within the past 12 months sprinkler and alarm tests that show that everything is working. So again, we're coming up to the 10th edition. If you're in an existing building, nothing to worry about. If you are doing alterations or additions, you are going to have to basically follow the 10th edition. There are some changes. If you have a facilities manager that has a code book, by the 2021 IECC building code, and also by the Massachusetts amendments, which are available at the State House bookstore, because the ICC is a nationally publication, but Massachusetts takes that and adds about 200 pages or so of amendments because Massachusetts is unique. Why? I don't know. But I just wanted to give you the heads up. If you have any questions, you can call me at the building department office. Yes, sir.
Does that cover both business and residential properties?
Yes. Yeah. It covers basically everything that comes under the purview of the building inspector. So it's pools, spas, 1 or 2 family homes, duplexes, apartments, all of the commercial industrial stuff, okay? It's not just one specific part of the code. It's the whole thing, all right?
Any other business anyone would like to bring up? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? All right, we'll be adjourned. Thank you for coming, and look forward to seeing you in 6 months. Reach out if you have any questions.